Hello, and welcome to Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Never thought I'd be sitting in an empty room in my house in a ball cap filming an episode. I guess I'm a little old school, but I do try to get a little more cleaned up when I film. But I kind of made a mistake, and I forgot that Monday is my birthday. So when I went to my granddaughter's swim meet this morning, I was informed that the rest of the weekend is planned out for me. I was planning on filming all day today, which is Saturday, editing all day tomorrow, which is Sunday, making thumbnails and adding music on Monday to post on Tuesday. Well, I've been informed that my entire weekend, the rest of today, all of Sunday, and most of Monday has been planned for me, which is a nice surprise. Of course, I'm not complaining about that, but sometimes people forget I work a lot. So I just said, you gotta let me run home, give me 90 minutes, give me an hour and a half and let me film so I have something to edit on Monday morning. So this is the way I went to my granddaughter's swim meet, and this is the way that I'm filming. And I think this, combined with the fact that I've been filming in this little empty room in my house waiting for my studio to be built, I honestly, I feel like I've tried to be so professional for years here, and I just feel like lately the whole thing has gone to shit. The saving grace is I have a fantastic story for you today. This one is really, really interesting. It's very, very current. It is all over TikTok. It is all over social media. This trial is all anyone is talking about right now. So forgive the casual appearance. Hopefully the good story will make up for it. Hit the like button if you like the video. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me. You can also listen to both of my podcasts. Dining with Death is the first podcast. This is an archival series. I don't make new episodes of this one. It's just the audio taken from the old video episodes before I branded the channel from Dining with Death to Dark Hearts. This is my current podcast. I post new episodes every Monday and Wednesday, and there will be podcast exclusive stories here that you cannot hear anywhere else. Both podcasts are available on Apple and Spotify. For the last, 6 weeks or more, every time I open TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, the news apps that I follow, all I'm seeing is Karen Read. When I tell you this case is dark, now obviously a man is dead, so it's dark right off the bat. But what has been revealed about the Boston Police Department and some procedural things, some personal things is pretty dark as well. People are so divided on this case. They are either dead sure that Karen Read is guilty, or they are dead sure that she is not, and that she is being framed by the Boston PD. Regardless of what you think about Karen's guilt or innocence, I think you have to admit that this case has shown a very ugly side of the police force in Boston. And what I've learned from following this case is that that's not a surprise to anybody from that area. But I think seeing it so blatantly play out has been shocking. Now, this case is still ongoing. It shouldn't be at this point. It shouldn't be, but we're going to get into it. It's still ongoing. We're going to talk about the case. We're going to talk about the timeline of events. And we're also going to delve into some other issues about the thin blue line, about honesty, and about the people that work for us that are supposed to protect our community. This is the very controversial story of the trial of Karen Read. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's begin. Our story begins in Canton, Massachusetts in the winter of 2022. A group of friends has gathered at C.F. McCarthy's bar to have a few drinks. Here you can see the group meeting up, giving each other hugs, and sitting down at the bar. Among the group is 42-year-old Karen Read, who worked as a financial analyst and adjunct professor at Bentley College. You can also see 46-year-old John O'Keefe, who is Karen's boyfriend. John was a Boston police officer. John O'Keefe was not only a cop, he was single-handedly raising his niece and nephew after his sister died, and then her husband died just months later. If that wasn't a lot already, to have your sister die, and then her husband die months later, leaving you in the care of these two kids, John's very close friend, who was also a cop named Pat Rogers, took his own life. Pat Rogers' girlfriend, Laura Sullivan, was pregnant at the time of his death. So John O'Keefe stepped in to help raise the baby of his deceased best friend. John became godfather to this baby, and it was just kind of this little family that he'd sort of inherited through tragedy. Laura Sullivan said that John was in the room when she gave birth, and she said John was a constant presence in her child's life. He was really, really supportive. John's niece and nephew were just 6 and 3 when he became their legal guardian. This man was raising these kids basically by himself. John and Karen had been dating for a few years, and their relationship was not good. It had been pretty much volatile from the beginning. In December of 2021, Laura Sullivan organized this group of about 70 people to go to Aruba. Karen and John were included in the group that went on the trip. One night at dinner, a part of the group, I don't know how many people, but it wasn't all 70 people, a large portion of the group went to dinner. And then when the check came, Karen was like, "Oh, I took care of the check." She paid for all of their meals. Karen made a lot of money, apparently. She was well off. But then later on in the evening, John was drunk. And Karen is walking across the lobby of the hotel room, and she sees John get out of the elevator with another woman on the trip. And he's kind of leaning on her and kind of lovey with her. And this sends Karen into a rage. Karen swears and screams at the woman in the elevator. The woman's like, "Hey, nothing's going on. He's just really drunk." And then Karen swore at her again and stormed off. Karen and John then went up to their hotel room and fought in front of the niece and nephew for like an hour. I mean, these poor kids, they've lost their mom. They've lost their dad, and now they're with this man who has taken them in, their uncle. And apparently he's got this kind of bitchy girlfriend that makes his life miserable. And I'm going to say something that's going to piss some people off. If you fight in front of children, I think you're trash. I do. I don't care if that makes people mad. Grow up and act like an adult and keep adult issues away from children. Children do not need to be exposed to fighting. It scares them, it unsettles them, it makes them feel unsafe, and it causes major, major issues later in life. It's not fair to them. Even if the kids know that you're fighting in another room, they feel safer and more loved knowing that you're keeping it from them. I've read a lot about this kind of thing. Even if they know, there's issues, that's okay because that's real life, but they know you care enough about them to not openly fight in front of them. It's still not the healthiest thing in the world, but people who sit and fight in front of children, I think it is just so trashy. We've lost our dignity. We've lost our shame. And I don't mean like morality shame. I mean like act like an adult. We've lost our sense of dignity. These public freakouts that I see all over social media all the time, trash. Where is your dignity? Where is your self-control? You are a grown-ass adult. I hate the word trashy when people apply it to like a woman in skimpy clothing or people that are low income, but I think trashy is an applicable word for people who behave badly and abuse others in public. I do, and fight in front of kids. I think it's trashy. And I really feel for these two little kids as I read more about them. They have been through so much. And then on top of that, they were forced to kind of endure this constant fighting between the only person in the world that they have to rely on and his girlfriend. I'm sorry. I'm sure that's going to make some people mad, but I feel very, very strongly that you should protect kids from adult issues. Kids do not need to be exposed to your sex life. Kids do not need to be exposed to your relationship issues, and they do not need to be exposed to fighting. I feel strongly about that. So that gives you a little taste of just how bad the relationship was between John and Karen. I'm sure it was good for the first 6 months or so, but we know clear back in 2021, it was already not good. So back to the night of January 28th, this group of friends, a lot of them are cops, are out in this bar, CF McCarthy's. The group then decided they were going to head over to another bar called the Waterfall Bar and Grill. Karen had a handful of alcoholic drinks during the evening, and she was noticeably drunk. Towards the end of the night, the bars started to slow down and close, and the group decided to take the party to one of the people in the group's house, a cop named Brian Albert. This is one of those cases where if you can make a mental note of the names, there's a lot of players involved. Everyone in the group appeared to be having a good time, but John and Karen were never in a good place. And apparently they got into it in the car. Karen is driving, which first of all, you're a cop, you're drunk. And instead of calling a car, you're gonna get into a car with another drunk driver. I'm not okay with that. I'm not. Karen and John get into Karen's car. She drives him to Brian Albert's house. And this is where everything goes sideways. The first thing you need to know is that there was another man in the group named Brian Higgins. So we've got two Brians. I'm going to call him Albert and Higgins. Brian Higgins was a friend of John O'Keefe's. 2 weeks before this night out at the bar, Karen and Higgins kissed. Well, Karen kissed Higgins, I should say. It will come out later that Karen and Higgins have been sending very flirtatious texts to each other. So keep that in mind as we proceed. Karen and John arrive at Albert's house. John gets out of the car and Karen leaves. She does not go in the house. There's going to be lots of controversy around this point right here. Did John O'Keefe go in Albert's house or did he not? We know that Karen did not go into the house. At about 1 a.m. that morning, while John was supposedly at Albert's house, Karen left a voicemail on John's phone. She said, "You are an effing loser. Go F yourself. I effing hate you." That was the voicemail that she left. That was at 1 a.m. We later find out that between 12:15 and 12:45, multiple witnesses saw a dark SUV outside of Albert's house. So what this ends up looking like is that Karen is outside of Albert's house. She drops John off. They're fighting. She decides not to go in the house. She drives off mad. And about 15 to 20 minutes later, calls him and leaves these nasty voice messages for him. Now, what goes on after John gets out of that car is the heart of the story. Let's finish the timeline as to what we know happened. At 4:23 a.m., it's snowing very hard. This is January in Boston. John O'Keefe's niece, the little girl, called a woman named Jennifer McCabe. Jennifer McCabe is Brian Albert's sister-in-law. Brian Albert is married to a woman named Nicole. Nicole and Jennifer McCabe are sisters. Jennifer McCabe is also, like I say, a very good friend of John O'Keefe's. John's niece was calling Jennifer McCabe to tell her that Karen was upset at the house because John had not come home, and it was almost 4:30 in the morning. Why are the kids up at 4:30 in the morning involved in this drunken fight? I find this just very, very distasteful. When the niece is on the phone talking to Jennifer, Jennifer McCabe can hear Karen in the background screaming. Karen is yelling, "John didn't come home. John didn't come home. Where is he? We had a fight. Oh my gosh, what's happened?" So now Jennifer is wide awake and she's concerned and she starts making phone calls. Around 5 a.m., Karen Reed gets on the phone and calls a woman named Carrie Roberts, who is the wife of one of John's closest friends. Carrie Roberts would later say that Karen, in this phone call, was saying things like, "What if John's dead? What if he's dead in a ditch somewhere? What if a snowplow hit him?" And then Karen tells Carrie, according to Carrie, "I don't remember anything that happened last night. We drank so much. I don't remember where we were. I don't remember dropping John off. I don't remember anything." So Carrie Roberts and Jennifer McCabe meet up with Karen Reed and they are going to go look for John O'Keefe. At some point after this meetup, it's the middle of the night, it's snowing, they're driving around looking for John. Apparently, according to who you ask, Karen says, "I have a broken taillight on my SUV. What if I hit John? How did it get cracked? What if I did something?" Now, Karen will later say those words never came out of her mouth. We'll get there. Carrie and Jennifer also claim that Karen is screaming about John being with another woman, an ex of his. At 5:07 a.m., a Ring camera that is on one of the houses in the area of the Albert home catches Karen's SUV driving very close to John's SUV. Then there's all this confusion because Karen would make a statement saying, "That's when I cracked my taillight. I bumped into John's SUV around 5 in the morning. But the other women are saying Karen was talking about her cracked taillight hours earlier. So the women are driving around looking for John O'Keefe and they end up right outside of Brian Albert's home. The women get out of the car and kind of split up and they're looking around. Then they hear Jennifer McCabe start screaming because she has found John O'Keefe lying in the snow and he is ice cold. It's about 6 a.m. at this point. She stands over him and straddles his body. She kneels down on the top of him and lifts up his shirt and then lifts up her own shirt and lays on top of him in an attempt to do like skin to skin, start warming him up. Apparently, Karen was standing off to the side screaming, "Oh my God, is he dead? Is he dead?" The women are now gathered around John O'Keefe's body and one of them starts to perform CPR while somebody else calls 911. First responders arrive within minutes. One of the EMTs would later say that Karen was hysterical and inconsolable. This same EMT would later testify that Karen was saying, "I hit him, I hit him. Oh my God, I hit him." The EMTs do what they can, but there is no medical treatment that will save John O'Keefe. He is dead. Now, of course, all the police arrive. This is a dead cop. This is a really big deal. And some very strange things happen in the next few hours. Things that, when I tell you this case is wild, I'm going to tell you something that doesn't come out until later because I want you to know this now so you can keep it in the back of your head as I tell the rest of the story. At 2:27 a.m., this is before Carrie Roberts or Jennifer McCabe knew that John was missing, someone did a Google search on Jennifer McCabe's phone. 2:27 in the morning. The Google search said, "How long to die in the cold?" There was actually a spelling error and it said HOS, long to die in the cold. Someone took Jennifer McCabe's phone and asked Google the question, how long does it take for somebody to die in the snow? Irrefutable evidence. That happened at 2:27 in the morning. Okay? So even though that doesn't come out till later, I want you to know that now. At this crime scene investigation makes the JonBenet Ramsey case look brilliant. Cops on shift are arriving at Albert's house, but there are also these cops that are getting phone calls that are still kind of half drunk from the night before, and they start showing up too. Brian Albert, whose house it is, the house where they've just found a dead cop, a friend of his, lying in the snow, never leaves his house. Brian Albert never walks out his front door. So there are lights and sirens, the sky is lit up blue and red, flashing lights, cops everywhere, and Brian Albert, a cop himself, never steps out his front door to go and see what's going on. He claims the cops come to his door, they tell him they have found John O'Keefe dead, and he says, well, I'm going to let you do your job, and he closes the door. Is this your reaction if your friend is laying dead in your front yard? You're telling me you're not going to walk out and start talking to all the cops that you know about what's going on? Very, very strange behavior. It gets so much worse. The cops on the scene are now kind of dealing with some of the other cops that are friends, and they start to gather evidence. CSI is not called to the crime scene, and these cops are walking around the crime scene, putting pieces of evidence into red Solo cups. You tell me under what condition a police officer would ever put a piece of evidence into a red Solo cup. They're not sterile. They're not sealable. We have no idea where those cups have come from. They could have been through the dishwasher. They could have people's saliva on them. They could have touched DNA on them. And these cops are using red Solo cups to collect evidence. Their excuse would later be, well, we saw some drops of blood in the snow and we were worried that the snow was going to start to melt. So we scooped up the snow with the blood on it and put it in the Solo cups. That is some high quality evidence collection, fellas. That is some... Let's take it a step further. You're telling me that this is Massachusetts, where it snows all the time, and the Boston, Massachusetts police force is not equipped with evidence bags for things like melting snow. They have to use red Solo cups. Make it make sense. Anyone that tries to defend this behavior by these cops, you should just stop because it's embarrassing. There is no defense for this type of horrific crime scene investigation. People's lives hang in the balance when evidence is collected from a crime scene. People go to death row and are killed by state-sanctioned murder based on what is found at these crime scenes. That should be sacred. It should be almost a religious devotion to making sure everything is done properly. Like I said, didn't call CSI. Also, didn't create a perimeter. Didn't cordon anything off. People are walking around. There's no official police perimeter. It gets worse. They didn't take any photographs. It's almost starting to feel like they wanted to be able to blame a bad investigation. Botched, blundered, inept, unprofessional, absolutely unreal. Every bit of evidence that ended up getting collected and put into a Solo cup was thrown out. You cannot use evidence that is improperly collected in a trial. You're going to tell me that these cops don't know that? You're going to tell me that cops are not aware that any evidence they collect with their bare hands and put into a Solo cup is not going to be used at trial? It's feeling very much like this was intentional. Along with blood evidence in the snow, of course, John O'Keefe's body, they find that he is missing a shoe. There is a broken cocktail glass near John's body as well. And there are also broken pieces of a taillight. This will become a huge point of controversy later on. There's a fire hydrant on one side of the street and a broken flagpole on the other. And in between those two items, they find, the broken cocktail glass, some broken taillight pieces, and then a little while later, they find John's missing shoe. It will later be alleged at trial that all of those items were planted. Let's talk about the taillight just very briefly. When you hit something with your car, a hard object, say you back into the corner of something, your taillight's gonna break into, 4 or 5 pieces. If it's really, really cold and you hit something really, really sharp, maybe it breaks into more like 10 pieces. These cops found 47 pieces of broken taillight. Explain it to me. Explain it to me like I'm 5. How does a piece of plastic this big even, say it was one of those massive ones that wraps around the side of the car, how do you get 47 pieces out of a piece of plastic that big? You would literally have to freeze it and then hit it with a sledgehammer or something so it shattered. John O'Keefe is dead in the snow. It looks like he might have been hit by a car. His body, which was covered in layers and layers of winter clothing, is not shattering a piece of plastic taillight into 47 pieces. It gets worse. Some of the taillight pieces were found on the night that John's body was found, and some of the taillight pieces were not found until days later. Not hours, days. If you investigated this crime scene properly, why did it take you days to find these pieces of plastic? Red plastic in the freshly fallen white snow. Karen Reed is taken to the police department. At this point, it is about 9 in the morning. She is given a blood alcohol content test, and at 9 in the morning, her BAC was between 0.073 and 0.083. Here in Utah, Karen Reed is still legally drunk. Utah, unlike the rest of the country, has a 0.05 legal limit for driving. That's less than 2 drinks in 1 hour. And we all know that you are not drunk after 2 drinks in 1 hour. This is just Utah's way of virtue signaling that they're the most moral state in the nation. Oh, you're going to have a 0.08 law? Well, we're going to have a 0.05 law because we're just that much more concerned and better than you are. I'm not even kidding. There is such a nanny, mommy mentality here when it comes to anything that the Mormons don't agree with. But anyway, if Karen's blood alcohol content was around 0.08, let's go somewhere in the middle. At 9 o'clock that morning, you can do the calculations and find out just how long it took for her blood alcohol content to come down. 0.08 at 9 in the morning means that around 12:45 the night before, early morning before, when she dropped John off at Albert's house, her blood alcohol content is estimated to be between 0.135 and 0.292. First off, that is a huge difference. 0.135 is drunk and functioning. 0.292 is wasted. If your blood alcohol content is 0.292, almost 0.3, you are blackout drunk, not remembering anything that happened that night, probably throwing up. You are barreled up, legless, cocked, off your face, plastered. Now, this checks out because Karen herself is claiming she couldn't remember anything that happened the night before. On January 31st, 2022, an autopsy was performed on John O'Keefe. The medical examiner ruled that he died of blunt force trauma to the head and hypothermia. The medical examiner went out of his way to put in the report that there were no obvious signs of a fight. What? Do you think it's usual and normal for a medical examiner to list all the things a person did not die of? I find the fact that the medical examiner went out of his way to write into the report that there were no signs of a fight absolutely shocking. It's almost like this medical examiner who, has close contact with a lot of these police officers. They see him all the time when they bring in dead bodies and ask about cases. It's almost like he wanted to say that, there was no fight between any of them and he wanted to protect them. So at this point, the cops have made up their mind. Karen Reed dropped John off at Albert's house. They were in a fight, she was mad, and she ran over him with her car. This is what the cops have decided. One of their own is dead, and they are going after his volatile, explosive girlfriend for killing him. The next day, February 1st, 2022, Karen Reed is arrested. The day after that, February 2nd, she appeared in Staunton District Court for the first time. She pled not guilty to manslaughter, to motor vehicle homicide, and to leaving the scene of a motor vehicle collision causing death. Then the court proceedings start up and the trial wheels are set in motion. On June 10th, 2022, a Norfolk County grand jury indicted Karen Reed on charges of second-degree murder, manslaughter while operating under the influence of alcohol, and leaving the scene of personal injury and death. Karen was arraigned and pled not guilty. The court ordered her held on $100,000 bail, and she posted bond and she was released. Karen has been out on bail ever since. A year went by and then the trial started. Opening statements are made by the prosecution and the defense, and it very quickly becomes clear this is going to be an explosive trial. Karen Reed's defense attorneys tell the judge and jury that it is their position Karen Reed is being framed for the murder of John O'Keefe. Framed by who? His fellow officers. There's something you need to know about Brian Albert. Brian Albert is known to have a temper, and he is known to be a person who gets in fights. Just the perfect kind of person that we want in law enforcement, right? Karen's attorneys claim that she dropped John O'Keefe off at Brian Albert's house that night and John went inside. Their claim is that something then happened in that house and Brian Albert and John O'Keefe got into a physical fight. Karen's attorneys state unequivocally that she did not hit John with her car, that John was killed in an altercation. Remember, Brian Albert is married to Nicole. Brian and Nicole were at the bar that night with a group of cops and their spouses, girlfriends partying. Brian Albert would say later on that he knew who John O'Keefe was. They would say hi, but they weren't friends. They weren't really good acquaintances. He says he didn't really know Karen at all, but what he knew of John, he liked. Nicole Albert takes the stand, and she says, I didn't know John. I didn't know Karen. I didn't know either one of them. Nicole said they were all at Waterfall Bar and Grill, and her husband, Brian Albert, said to the group, hey, everybody come back to my house. Nicole said she just went along with it. It was fine to have everyone come back to her house, but she says neither John O'Keefe nor Karen Reed stepped foot in her house that night. Nicole Albert is adamant that John Albert was never in her house. This is already a different version of Karen Reed's story, who said she dropped John off and he went inside. Everybody funnels out of the Albert house, and then Nicole claims that she and her husband, Brian, went to bed and they slept for about 4 hours. Nicole says she's asleep in her bedroom when her sister, Jennifer McCade, bursts into the room and says, John is dead. John is dead. He's out in the snow. Nicole and her husband, Brian Albert, get out of bed. They walk to their front door, and that is where they are told by the police officers that John O'Keefe is dead in their front yard, the vicinity of their front yard. Karen Reed's attorneys asked Nicole, is your husband a violent man? Is your husband a trained fighter? And Nicole says, well, he was in the military. I'm sure he does have some sort of combat training. And yes, he was actually also a boxer. She goes out of her way to really downplay the fact that her husband knows a lot about fighting. Brian Albert takes the stand, and he tells the judge and the jury that the house that this all took place at was his childhood home. This is the house that he grew up in. That explained it, because I was like, this is a really big, nice house for a cop to afford. But, that's generational wealth. Your parents bought a house for $30,000 and then died and passed it on to you. And then, you have a nice house to sell later on. While other people whose parents didn't have a house, that's a different story for a different day. But that does explain how a cop could afford this house. So Brian explains to the judge and the jury that he went to the door, he talked to the cops, he knew they had a job to do, he closed the door, and he went back inside his house. Brian Albert said, I saw no reason to go outside. Make of that what you will. If somebody that I know is dead in my front yard, I'm going outside. But what can I say? I am the very vocal and insistent neighbor. This is where we need to introduce another person in our story. This man is Michael Proctor. Michael Proctor is a Massachusetts state police trooper who has landed in some very hot water over this case. Michael Proctor is the cop that first spoke with Brian Albert and informed him that John O'Keefe was dead. It's later revealed that Michael Proctor has sent some very troubling text messages. He has some things in his background and in his history that are very, very troubling. We're going to have to do a part 2 to this. This will become apparent. We're going to talk a little bit more about Michael Proctor then. But Michael Proctor and Brian Albert had a private conversation after John O'Keefe's body was dead. The other thing that you need to know is about 6 months after John O'Keefe's body was found at his house, Brian Albert retired as a cop. He'd been with the force for 30 years, and all of a sudden he decided he was going to retire. He currently gets a monthly pension of $8,483.11. What twilight zone am I living in? I thought cops made like 60 grand. Maybe he was a detective, maybe detectives make a lot more, but I mean, I didn't think they made $100,000. Not only does Brian quit the police force, Brian and Nicole Albert then put his childhood home up for sale, the home that he grew up in and has lived in his whole life, and they sell it for $905,000. This is almost $1 million home. Karen's defense attorneys would later cross-examine Brian Albert and basically tell the jury it is the defense position that Brian Albert and Jennifer McCabe are in cahoots. Their theory is that Brian and John got into a fight, Brian killed John, and Jennifer knew about this murder. It is Jennifer's phone that is used to make the Google search, "How long to die in the snow?" and that search takes place at 2:27 a.m. The defense theory is that Jennifer McCabe helped her brother-in-law cover up this murder. Not only did Jennifer McCabe make that Google search at 2:27 a.m., she deleted it. She deleted the search, she closed out the window that the search was done in, and she cleared her history. That doesn't delete anything off your phones. Forensic experts then take Jennifer's phone and use a tool called Celebrite to extract information that has been deleted from the iPhone. I find this Google search to be damning. Damning is the word. I mean, not only does Jennifer McCabe delete the Google search, she deletes every single phone call she made that night. From 12:30 a.m. to 6:30 a.m., there were multiple phone calls deleted from Jennifer McCabe's call record. Those calls were found by the forensic experts. This gets so much crazier. Brian Albert has a dog named Chloe, and Chloe is a 70-pound German Shepherd. Chloe went to live with the Alberts in 2017, but they did not register her as their dog until 2019. Chloe had been with the family for 7 years. And just after the murder, she was rehomed. Rehomed where? Who took her? The Alberts won't say. We don't know what happened to Chloe, the German Shepherd. Why does this matter? I would love to show you an unedited photo of John O'Keefe's arm, but I cannot on this platform because you cannot show any portion of a dead body, not even with blurred out lines. John O'Keefe's right arm is tore up. This arm, from the top to the bottom, you can go online and Google what it looks like, has giant shred marks all the way down it, and around this area here looks like it has puncture wounds. There are these deep puncture wounds. They're not bleeding. I don't know that the skin was completely broken on the puncture wounds, but you can definitely see them. The skin is definitely broken on the shreds. Karen's defense attorneys dig around and find out that Chloe, the German Shepherd, attacked 2 people on 2 different occasions. They were injured so severely, they ended up in the hospital. This was a dangerous dog, a dog that has now disappeared. Before the Alberts sold their home for $905,000, they suddenly dug up the basement floor. They claim they have their reasons for doing that. Karen Reed's defense attorneys say that Chloe, the German Shepherd, is buried under the house. Why? So no one can find her and line her teeth up to the marks on John O'Keefe's arm. That is the defense theory. Look, if you get hit by a car, you're going to have crushing injuries. You're going to have blunt force trauma injuries. You are not going to have shreds in your arm from top to bottom, along with puncture wounds that were made by something so strong it was able to tear your flesh through several layers of clothing. Give me a scenario. I'm literally saying in the comments, give me a scenario where you get hit by a car, your head is severely injured, but you actually die of hypothermia and the injury. How is your arm getting tore up all the way down it like this? And where did the puncture marks come from? I spent hours on Reddit, on news sites, on social media, and I have not found a single viable explanation for where those wounds came from. If John O'Keefe was attacked by a dog that was apparently very protective of the family, maybe a dog that would have jumped in had there been a physical fight between his owner and someone else, that dog is going to grab the arm over and over and over because the clothes are going to make it hard for the dog to get a grip. And every time that dog grabs the arm, those teeth are going to drag through the clothing. I am no forensic expert. I am no forensic scientist. If you showed me a photograph of John O'Keefe's arm, I would say that looks like an animal attack. If I knew nothing about this case, I would say that looks like an animal attack. Now, I briefly mentioned the man named Brian Higgins. Brian Higgins is the man that Karen Reed kissed 2 weeks before John's death. Brian Higgins is the man that was texting with Karen. Brian Higgins is an ATF agent, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, and he is a close friend of Brian Albert's. Brian Higgins was with the group partying, first at CF McCarthy's and then at the Waterfall Bar and Grill. There is a theory that Brian Higgins persuaded John O'Keefe to come to Brian Albert's house that night. Remember, John and Brian didn't know each other that well. So Brian Higgins could get John O'Keefe alone and have an altercation with him because Brian Higgins wanted his girlfriend Karen. These are drunk guys. They are drunk cops who, we all know that some cops kind of have a sense of entitlement. I can get away with anything. Not all, but some. Did Brian Higgins want John O'Keefe to come to that house so he could get in a fight with him? Now, check this part out. Brian Albert's phone called Brian Higgins' phone at 2:20 a.m. Brian Higgins picks up the call. We obviously don't know what was said. A few minutes later, Brian Higgins calls Brian Albert. This Brian called this Brian, and then this Brian called this Brian back. Both times the calls were answered. When Brian Higgins and Brian Albert are asked about these phone calls on the stand, they said those phone calls did not happen. The iPhones are both magically lying. Neither one of those phone calls happened. Their explanation for the actual evidence that the phone calls were placed? Butt dials. Butt dials. Butt dials that got picked up by both men. Look, I'm trying to keep an open mind here. It's not like I think Karen Reed is any sort of a saint in this story. She was wasted. She was driving. She's obviously a person that she's flirting with her boyfriend's friends. She's kissing her boyfriend's friends. I mean, I'm not a fan of Karen Reed. She's fighting in front of these kids that have nowhere else to go. She very well could have done this, but I am struggling with this information. I am on the struggle bus. Brian Higgins and John O'Keefe had known each other for about a year. They'd see each other at the local bars, and one time Brian even went to John O'Keefe's house to watch a Patriots game. Brian Higgins said that he considered both John O'Keefe and Karen Reed friends. So Brian Higgins is closer to John and Karen than Brian Albert, the house owner, is. In Brian Higgins' testimony, he adamantly claims that John O'Keefe never stepped foot inside Brian Albert's house. Brian said, I never saw John O'Keefe inside the Albert house, and I never saw Karen inside the house. Brian then tells the judge and jury that he was probably the first one to leave the after party. He was tired. He wanted to go home. Higgins says that he is away from the party and home in bed by 2 a.m. He claims he is awakened at 6:30 in the morning by a phone call from Brian Albert telling him, the cops are at my house. John O'Keefe is dead in my front yard. Brian Higgins testified, quote, it didn't make sense to me. I couldn't do the math in my head because I knew John O'Keefe and the defendant, they never showed up at the house. It didn't make sense. They weren't there. The defense then brings out these text messages between Karen and Brian Higgins, and they are like, I get secondhand embarrassment for people sometimes, you guys. This first little group of text messages, Karen says, you stink. And Brian Higgins replies, you suck and you're double trouble. Ugh. Are they 13? Karen then says, you're hot. And Higgins says, are you serious or messing with me? Karen says, no, I'm serious. Higgins replies, feeling is mutual. Is that bad? How long have you thought that? Oh, I'm not a flirty person. I'm not a social butterfly at all. I'm very much like, if I'm in a bar, I'm sitting in the corner watching everybody do their thing. There was only one period of my life where I was very social. I call it my drunken disorderly tour. It was during my literal mental breakdown. Again, this is part of the story that I think I'll get permission to tell pretty soon. But I get very embarrassed for adults that send these juvenile text messages and stuff. It gives me the ick. I know that's judgmental. I should just shut up. Brian Higgins tells the judge and jury that after these flirtatious text messages were sent back and forth, John O'Keefe and Karen and Brian Higgins were together watching a ball game. They're all at John O'Keefe's house, and somehow in the corner or, behind a wall or whatever, Karen kisses Brian Higgins on the mouth. He said it was not a friend kiss, it was lip to lip. There are more text messages. Karen tells Higgins to come over to her house. She tells him she never wanted kids and talked about how John's dedication to his niece and nephew are causing problems in their relationship. Trash. If you get into a relationship with someone who has 2 children in their care and you don't want kids, you're trash. Throw the whole person away. You made a choice to get involved in someone's life that has children in their care. If you're going to resent those children or treat them like crap because of your decision, you trash. I'm just sick to death of kids ending up the victims of terrible adults. And every time I say something like this, I get the ultimate comment of, oh, well, why don't you virtue signal a little bit harder? Okay, Chad. Okay, that's what I'm doing. You know, some of us actually do have strong emotions involving kids. These messages between Karen and Brian Higgins go on, and I don't have the energy to read any more of them. But how did Karen's defense team get these messages? And how did these messages come out? Well, they went and got Brian Higgins' phone, right? And they read them. Oh no, because Brian Higgins threw his phone away. He threw it away. Brian Higgins, an officer of the law, threw his phone away in the middle of a murder investigation that had text messages on it from the defendant. These are not smart cops. These are not smart cops, and these are not cops who even understand what their job is, because they know forensic scientists can go in and gather the data even if the phone's thrown away. Also, who throws a phone away these days? Your contract is up or whatever. You either keep the phone until it falls apart, or you trade it in for a new one, you sell it or whatever. You don't just throw a phone in the trash. Even if it's broken or, not in good condition, you can sell it to one of those companies for $30. I mean, maybe I'm just cheap, but I don't throw stuff like that away. But Brian Higgins, he's just a cop. He's just a cop. He wouldn't know any better than to throw his phone away in the middle of a murder investigation to which he is a party that was flirting with the defendant through that phone. No, everything's fine. Everything's fine. So let's just really quickly recap. We know that Karen never goes inside the Albert home. Everyone agrees on that. Brian Higgins and Brian Albert claim that John never goes inside the house. Karen says he did. Jennifer McCabe makes a Google search on her phone around 2:30 in the morning saying, "How long to die in snow?" Jennifer McCabe claims at trial that she didn't make that Google search, that Karen made the search at 5 o'clock when they were driving around in the car. So why did the search record at 2:30? Because she had an open window on her search engine. She had an open window on her Safari or Chrome or whatever. And at 5 in the morning, while the 3 women are driving around in the car, Karen took Jennifer's phone and typed in, "How long to die in the snow?" as they're looking for John. Well, because the window, the search engine window, was opened on her phone at 2:30. That's why it recorded the search at 2:30 and not at 5 o'clock. Do people realize they should just not talk about things they don't know anything about? I get on Facebook and I see these people that, one day they're a politics expert. The next day they're an expert on the Middle East. The next day they're an expert on gas prices. They know everything. Jennifer McCabe should just have shut her mouth. It does not matter how long a window is open in your search engine. The search does not record. The timestamp is not stamped until enter is hit. The fact that Jennifer McCabe might have had an open window in her search engine does not mean that the search recorded at 2:30 if the search was done at 5 a.m. If the search was done at 5 a.m., it would have recorded at 5 a.m. It did not. It recorded at 2:30. The defense brought in retired FBI agents, forensic phone experts. They all agreed that is ridiculous. The Google search was done around 2:30 in the morning, not 5 a.m. We know that Matthew McCabe, Jennifer's husband, hears her screaming around 5 a.m. We've got to go find John. Matthew McCabe even testifies that when his wife Jennifer is on the phone with Karen, Matthew can hear Karen screaming through the phone. We know that Karen is unhappy and she does not like the fact that John takes care of these 2 orphaned children. We know that Karen is flirting and kissing other officers. We know that Brian Albert is a violent man and he has a history of physically fighting other people. We know that John O'Keefe is dead from blunt force trauma and hypothermia. We know that John's arm is covered in tears and puncture wounds. We know that the coroner went out of his way to put in the report there was no indication of a fight. We know for a fact that the search, How Long to Die in the Cold, was done at 2:30 in the morning, 2:27 in the morning, not at 5 a.m. Karen Reed was not with Jennifer McCabe at 2:30 in the morning. Now, we are running short on time for the length I usually keep my videos, and we have to do a part 2 anyway. We're going to go over more details in part 2. But why do we have to do a part 2? Because on July 2nd, just a few weeks ago, the jury came back hung The jury returned to the judge and said, "We are starkly divided and there is no way we will ever reach a verdict." They debated for 27 hours and the judge was forced to declare a mistrial. Judge Beverly Cannon set a date for July 22nd for the case to return to court. It will be on that date that we find out what the prosecution intends to do. The prosecution has stated to members of the media that it plans to retry Karen Read. Karen Read's defense attorney, Alan Jackson, is as locked in as the prosecution is. He is adamant that his client has been framed for killing a police officer that was actually killed by some of his fellow officers. Every time Karen Read appears at trial, there is a literal mob of supporters. I don't know that these supporters are so much in favor of Karen as they are against the Boston PD. This is not the first time the Boston PD has been accused of very serious problems and misconduct. There are obviously some very disturbing issues in that organization, issues that need to be addressed.
People from all over the country are flocking to the courthouse to show their support for Karen Read.
Our team coverage continues now at WBZ's Tammy Mutasa. And Tammy, from the pink T-shirts to the signs, sometimes on the overpasses, even costumes, this crowd has been really passionate.
A sea of pink swarming Karen Read with echoes of encouragement as she walked out of the Norfolk County Superior Court, her second-degree murder case now in the hands of the jury.
And I wonder how many other people have gone through this. I wonder.
The phones were out capturing every step of the defendant on the day 6 men and 6 women start deliberating Read's fate. Her supporters have never bought the prosecution's case, saying Read hit Boston police officer John O'Keefe with her SUV, then left him in a snowbank to die. They believe the defense's case that she was framed by crooked cops.
The not guilty verdict. I want to be right here for the celebration. I can't celebrate at home by myself. I'm with everybody who was found Karen to be not guilty. Free Karen Read! Free Karen Read!
The chants, the signs, the cars, even the umbrellas, all saying the same things. Supporters from all over the Bay State camping out, waiting it out for the verdict, however long it takes.
We're just anxiously awaiting the jury to come back and proclaim her innocence.
Now, I support Karen Read, but I really hope that this kind of thing expands out into other parts of the community.
This is where we're at, my friends. This is a fascinating case. There's going to be documentary after documentary made about this. It's getting to become, a little bit of a mini OJ. I feel terrible for John O'Keefe's family. I feel awful for his niece and his nephew. Those kids have lost everyone who has ever taken care of them. We got to remember to keep those kids in the forefront of this conversation. We've got to remember to keep John O'Keefe's name in the forefront of the conversation. And as this circus, rolls forward, I just think it's really important we stay focused on what matters. A man lost his life. Whether this woman hit him with her car or whether he was killed by the Boston PD, somebody's dead. The question remains, is it possible to get true justice when you are fighting the people that are supposed to investigate the murder? It's a wild one. It's a wild one. I'm off to do my birthday weekend. Thank you for sitting with me for this story. Hit the like button if you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me, and you can also join my Patreon. Our community raises money to donate to police departments that have cold case DNA in storage that has never been tested. This is the thumbnail on my channel. You can go to this video and watch it. It explains everything about the fundraiser. You do not have to join Patreon to donate to the fundraiser. You can donate through PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, Venmo, Cash App. I keep a spreadsheet of everybody's usernames, the amount, and the date of their donation, and I will make that public at any time. All you gotta do is ask to see it. We haven't raised enough yet to test our first kit, so we need more donations to keep coming in. The kits cost between $550 and $750 each to test. If you want to join my Patreon, that's amazing. Some people give $2, some people give $5, $10. That helps me keep the videos coming. And of course, you can also listen to my podcasts. I talked about those in the beginning. This is Dining with Death. All of these episodes are posted. This is an archival series. There won't be new episodes, but there's some really good stories. And this is the current podcast, Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. I post new episodes every Monday and Wednesday. Both podcasts are on Apple and Spotify. I cannot wait to read the comments on this one. This is a very important case. You know, where much power is given, more accountability is required. And we've got a situation here where these cops are coming off looking shady as hell. So get involved in the conversation, drop some comments, let me know what you think. I sure appreciate you spending part of your day with me, and I'm really grateful to have you as part of our community. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other, and I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.